Hello and welcome back to Rule the Game. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to play Empire's End, a game by John D. Clair, published by Brotherwise games, game for 2 to 4 players, starting at age 13, and it'll last about 45 to 60 minutes. Now, if you wonder, haven't I heard about John D. Clair before? You might have, because he also came up with one of my all-time favorites, Space. Well, I'm not going to discuss this game here, but it's amazing. So you might want to look it up somewhere else. Anyway, today is all about Empire's End. As usual, I'll start with showing you how you get victory points and how you score at the end of the game. Then I'll show you how to play the game. I have some hints for you to play your first game. And then I'll show you how to set up the game at the very end. And before we go there though, please go down below and subscribe to this video, subscribe to this channel, and I would love to have you here again in the future. But now, without further ado, Empire's End. Rule the game. Empire's End is a game that consists of a lot of disasters. You'll start with an empire that you own. It consists of a bunch of locations, and during the game, many disasters are going to show up, and you're going to try to protect your locations from as many of those disasters as you possibly can. And if a disaster hits, then you'll try to rebuild these locations so that they give you victory points again. Meanwhile, you also try to innovate, and you'll try to get some industry going so that you get more victory points. This could be what the game looks like at the very end. I'm showing you one player over here. This is the main board in the middle, where you see many different spaces, and on each space here from the start to the end, you're going to do different phases that I'm going to show you later in the gameplay. Now, once you've reached the end, every player will already have some victory points. That's shown here by this victory point tracker. And you see here also the victory point track. You win those victory points by battles, military battles in between. You might also get some from industry phases and so on. And then in the final stage, now that we're at the end, you'll also get some victory points from your healthy locations. Now down here, every player has 11 locations. Some of them are healthy and some are destroyed. You see the destroyed ones rather easily here with the fire on the bottom, but they also have the victory points up here crossed out in red. The locations that are still not destroyed will have the victory points not marked out, of course, and you'll add all these points that you have here of the healthy locations, and you'll add them to your victory point tracker. That will rather easily probably get around 100 points here and end up somewhere else. You'll also add some extra points from innovations. Those are shown here below your locations in orange. For example, down here, you get 1 victory point per wheat that you have. And I currently still have here 4 wheat. So I'll get an additional 4 points. And that will be my final score. Whoever has the highest score will win the game. If there's a tie, then the person who has more healthy locations will win. And if there's still a tie, you'll share the win. Empire's End is played in phases. You will start the game here with the hourglass on the start. You will then play each phase of the game. Every player plays at the same time. And once a phase is completed, everybody has done their turns, their actions, you'll move into the next phase. I will not go through all the phases now from start to finish, but I'll show you every single phase and how it's played. We'll do that by starting back here towards the end of the game. Now, as you can see over here, depending on if you're 3 players or 4 players, you will play this phase here actually differently. This is designed for disaster. Here you have for 3 players, you will play 1 disaster, and for 4 players, you'll play 2 disasters. Now let's assume we are 3 players. In this case, what do you do with 1 disaster? Is that you open up the disaster here. The top disaster will come out and you'll place it in the middle of you. The disaster card shows the following things. First, there is a name for it, and there's also a number. The number corresponds with the space that it's going to destroy on your board, the location on your board that it's going to destroy, which is the first one, so the one here, and every player will take one of their flames and put that flame now on their first location. That will help them to remember which location is currently or could potentially currently now be destroyed. Then next you'll see a couple of resources. That might also just be one resource there. That's the resource that you can pay to avoid this disaster. And what you see at the very bottom is when you take this disaster, it will actually be a resource, an innovation for yourself, something that you will have. You see already here on the bottom of all these cards, you see actually the end of a disaster card. You push them underneath other cards or underneath the disaster in that way. And I will show later what all these icons down here below actually mean. Now what happens in the disaster phase is that the first player, that's the player who has this white temple, that player can now decide if they want to take this disaster or if they want to pay for avoiding disaster. What they could do, this player could, is that they could pay now a wheat and put this wheat on top of the card, and in that case they don't actually have to take the disaster. Now same for the next player. That person might also pay a wheat, and maybe the player afterwards actually pays an axe because they don't want it either. Instead of paying a wheat or an axe, you can also pay with coins, because coins in this game are wild cards or wild tokens. They can be used for anything. Now there's another way, instead of paying, that you could actually avoid the disaster. And you see that down here on one of those cards, this is a disaster card that is underneath this road. And what it means is here that if you don't want this disaster, but you don't want to pay with one of those two different resources either, you can take one of these cubes, you can place it right here, and then it says in that case, you don't have to pay an axe. So now I wouldn't have to pay an axe. I wouldn't have to pay any resource. Please note that I can only cover this field here once, and this field is now deactivated, and I won't be able to use this card anymore to avoid a disaster. The next two players still don't want this flood, so they place another 2 wheat on it. Well, I've had enough now. I'm going to take it because I only have a road here. It's worth 9 points. Yes, that's true, but it's only 9 points, and sometimes you have to accept that you will have something that breaks and gets destroyed. If I decide to take it, I will first take away all these resources that are on top. They're mine now. They usually go all behind this visor here, but I'm just going to show you without, otherwise you can't see what resources I have. And then what you do is, first of all, you destroy your location 1. You flip it around, it is now destroyed. Next, you'll take this card, this is the disaster card, and you can now build it into your town. A disaster card can go anywhere underneath other disaster cards, underneath also healthy locations, but it can never go under a destroyed location. Also, you always have to put the card underneath another card that has the least number of disaster cards underneath it. So in this case, you see over here, I already have 2 disaster cards underneath this town. So I couldn't put my new disaster cards there, and I can place it here where you have disasters. This one would actually have no disaster card underneath, but you can't place it there either. So I need to place it somewhere else on a healthy location that only has 1 card. Let me place it right here. The person who took the disaster will also take the white temple. In this case, I had the white temple before, but I'll take it again. So now that we've played this disaster, we move on our hourglass to the next phase. Here you have a double disaster. What that means is that we'll take the 2 topmost cards from the deck and place them in the middle again. again the person with the white temple starts. Now the first player can either take both locations, they can avoid both locations by paying something on them, in this case wheat, or they can decide to take one but not the other. First thing that we do though is that we'll take the fire again and we place it on the tiles that we have here. So here it's location 3 and it's location 10. It is well possible that a disaster will actually affect one of your destroy locations already. What that means for you though is that if you're the person here and location 4 is going to be destroyed, you will have to destroy either location 3 or location 5. If location 1 were destroyed, you would have to destroy location 3. So it's always adjacent and closest adjacent to where the card actually shows. In this case, it's 3 and 10, so it's locations that both are healthy in my case anyway. So what I will do is I'll pay here 2 wheat, and therefore I don't have to take these disasters. Now let's say this time somebody else actually takes this one, the second player takes this one, and they pay another wheat on this one, and the third player takes this one. The third player was the last one to take a disaster, they'll also get the white temple. Also note here that if a player has less than 5 resources after a disaster, then they can take away their visor here. They show that they only have less than 5 resources. And what they can then do is they can deduct 2 victory points from their victory point tracker here, and they can actually take another resource, and they can do this until they have a total of 5 resources again. That could mean that you even have negative victory points at the end of this move. Also, if you happen to be unfortunate enough and have 2 disasters in the double disaster phase here that both affect the same space, then in that case, you'll actually affect this space, but also for the second location, that will be the second closest one, the second closest healthy one to this one, which will be this one. So you won't affect twice number 3, but it will be once number 3. And then once that one is destroyed, then the next one to destroy will be this town here. Next, we'll move here into a split economy and industry phase. Now you see that during the game, there are economy phases, industry phases, they're usually separate. Here at the end, you have both in one, and each player actually gets to play both of them in the order that they want to play it in. Now we're gonna play the economy phase first. That's the green phase here. And what you'll do is actually rather simple. You'll go here through all your locations and all the disaster cards under the locations, and you'll check for cards that say economy here, and then you can do all these actions that it actually says underneath this economy. It can be very simple, like over here, where you just get a hammer. It could be something like this, where you would get an axe if you have an army next to it. And you actually, in this case, have an army right here, but it turns out that this army is destroyed, so it doesn't really help you. You can't get an axe. If this army had not been destroyed, you had it still healthy, then you would now gain an axe that you can take here to your tokens. You also have some cards that let you exchange here. You exchange a wheat for an axe and a hammer. Over here is again, you get, if you have a town next to it, a healthy town, you would get a hammer. However, the road is here destroyed anyway, and you can never get anything under a card that is destroyed. You also see here again where you can exchange a wheat into a hammer or an axe. And in this case, it's really or, but you can do this twice. So you could exchange 1 wheat into an axe and 1 wheat into a hammer. And you see here another action here where this card actually would make this field and this field, or even up here in the locations, it would remove any of these tokens if you had filled a field with this token here, with this cube. But in this case, it's only the ones next to it and not the one underneath. So nothing actually happens to this cube and it stays there. And so since we've now done the economy phase, we will do the industry phase. And please remember, any player can do this in the order that they wish. We've decided to do economy here first. Now I'm going to do industry. And industry is similar to economy, but it lets you do a few more things. Industry, for one, is similar to economy in such that you can check all your locations and also your cards underneath, the innovations, if you have something that says industry. And you see we actually have a bunch of them. And here now we actually have here the industry that says you can recover here this cube here so you can use this field later again. Or we have here one that says you can exchange two locations. Unfortunately, this is under a destroyed card, so you can't play this one. But here you can actually exchange your locations with this one. We also have this ability here. It's as an industry ability where we can move any card from underneath any of the locations to another location. However, the second location where we move the card to needs to be a healthy location. So you need to follow the rules of how you place a card underneath there. A second action that you can do is that you can repair a destroyed location. For this, you would have to use hammers. You would have to have enough hammers or coins, because coins can be used as a wild card. You have to use enough hammers, as it says here on the destroyed cards, right next to the victory points that are marked out. So for the farm here, you would need 5 hammers to repair this farm. Now I do actually have here 3 hammers and I have 2 coins. So I can pay this to repair my farm. You can only repair one location. If you repaired a location that has an industry phase underneath, an industry innovation underneath, and you played the order of the actions differently, you could first repair a location and then you can still play the industry ability afterwards. And then the third action that you can do is that you will always have 4 cards in your hand, 4 disaster cards. But remember, disaster cards are not always a bad thing, because you use all the disaster cards as innovations once you move them underneath a location. So what I can do is actually I can build 2 of these disaster cards underneath the location. You see that all these cards have here hammers underneath them. Most of them have just 1 hammer, some have 2. This is the cost that you have to pay to actually build one of those disaster cards. Now, you will also see that your towns here say that it costs you 1 less hammer to build a card underneath somewhere. It doesn't need to be to build underneath your town, but it's to build underneath another card, another location. Now, if you have cards that only cost you 1 hammer, then since I still have 2 towns that are both healthy, I could use this ability twice. I could actually build those 2 cards for free underneath here somewhere. If one of my towns were destroyed, I could only build 1 card for free. If you have a card that costs you 2, you can't build this one for free ever. Even if you only build this card, you will only get 1 hammer discount on this card. You'll still have to pay 1 hammer. So you can't add up the 2 hammers that you have here. You can build 2. You can also just build 1. If you only want to build 1, or if you even want to build none, you can sell a card. And that just means you put it on the discard pile and you take a coin. No matter what you do, if you built your cards, if you sold your cards, or if you sold or built, you will end up with only 2 cards left in your hand. You can now decide if you want to also discard those 2 cards, and you would have to discard both of them, or if you want to keep them, But in any case, you'll refill your hand up to 4. So if I keep them, I'll take 2 cards. If I discard them, put them in a discard pile here, I would take 4 cards. And as to the industrial abilities, you will keep them until your location is destroyed. Even if you destroy a location, the innovation will stay there. And if you repair a location, then the innovation can be used again. If you move 2 locations, because you, for example, use here this industrial ability, you will also move the cards underneath. And that brings us to the last phase that is possible, which is here, the military phase. In the military phase, we first reveal a military phase card. You see here a certain number of axes or swords that are needed to gain certain victory points or lose victory points if you have less than the 5 swords here. We will first check on our board how many swords we actually have. I currently have 2 swords here. There would be 2 swords here on the other side of this army, but it's destroyed, so I don't have it. But then we have down here, we also get 1 more pair of swords if a destroyed location is right next to it, which I have here. So that means I get a 3rd sword. I have 2 here, 3 swords, 3 available right now. Now, as you can see here, if I only have 3 swords, then I get -2 victory points. Now, what happens now is every person, every player has counted their swords that they have, and they will then take some axes from behind their visor so that nobody sees how many they've taken. They can also take coins, of course, because they're wild cards. They take them into a closed hand, they hold out the hands into the middle, and then everybody reveals their axes at the same time. You now sum up however many axes or coins you have in your hand, plus the axes that you already had in your board, and then you will check how many you have in total now. I stupidly took 3 axes here, so I end up at 6, which is here between 5 and 9, so I'll get 5 victory points and a coin. Had I gone to 10 or more swords, I would have gotten 11 victory points and 2 coins. The person or the people who have the most swords in total, they will share or they will win the victory, which gives them an additional 4 victory points. And this is where you now will move your victory point marker, however many victory points you'll get here, even if it's the -2. The victor will also get whatever additional bonus they have over here, in addition to however many points they get down here below. And if you didn't have the highest number of swords and axes, then you will now have an upheaval, which means that you'll take, in this case, the second most valuable location that you currently have, which in my case is the town of 25 victory points up here, and you'll place it in space number 2. This is space number 2. We will actually swap these 2 locations. And this is how the board will change for the different players during the game. We will all start with the same board, the same order of locations, but there will be some of these upheavals that will move the different boards around. The axes that you had in your hand will go back into the bank and you can't use them anymore. And that's already it. So you have these 4 different phases. You have the disaster phase, industrial phase, economic phase, and the military phase. You play through all these phases in the order that it says here on the board until you reach the end, and that's it. There's one card that I've forgotten to mention, a disaster card that you currently see over here, this fire turning into 3 hammers. What that means is that should this location be destroyed, if we flip it around, will then get 3 hammers when the disaster occurs. And this, just like the other abilities that you get with the disaster cards underneath your location, is also an ability that will that you will regain should you repair this card, should you repair the farm with 3 hammers at some point later. If it gets destroyed again, you'll get 3 hammers again. And here's some hints for the first game. Honestly, I think I'm the wrong person to give you hints to this game because this is not my kind of game. I have played it several times and I never succeeded, but I do know why this is and still I can't overcome it. And I think my issue really is that I never pay enough. I never want to pay enough. I'm too cheap to pay off the disasters. I take too many disasters, I get too many locations destroyed, and because of that, I always lose all these victory points and I will never be able to repair all these different destroyed locations that I have. And if you look at the board here, you'll actually see that there only are four industry phases where you could potentially actually repair a destroyed location. But there's going to be at least one, if not two of those phases where you might not have enough hammers to actually do anything, which means that destroyed location that he had from earlier will not going to go away. So I think the best thing really is to keep paying for a disaster card rather than taking it, unless it has a lot of resources on it. And if it has a lot of resources on it, then you can take it because then the resources will help you later on to repair those places, or they will help you to build other stuff. So then it's worth it, but don't take a card right away after the first round. Unless it destroys something tiny. If it destroys a little farm, sure, then you can do that. Or if it, even the armies I wouldn't destroy, because the armies you're going to need later for a military phase. And if you don't have these armies, then you don't have the swords. If you don't have the swords, you don't get out of victory points, and you're behind already again. So really, having the least number of destroyed locations at the end is probably the key, if you ask me. Or if you have only small ones destroyed. There are a few innovations that you can get that actually give you points for destroyed locations, but still, even then, you should only get locations destroyed that are not worth any points. If you ever get a city or a town destroyed, you will have a really hard time coming back from this. At least I did. I was never able to make up for it. One town gone, I was done. And that's Empire's End. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please go and subscribe below. And if you still want to see how to set up the game, that will come up next. To set up the game, you'll take the main board and you place it in the middle of the table. There is a 3 to 4 player version on one side and the 2-player version on the other side. We're going to show you the 3 to 4 player version. Each player then gets this privacy screen that has here also a color on it, and you'll take the corresponding victory point tracker, you'll put the privacy screen here on your side, and you'll place the victory point tracker marker up here on the 0. We'll place the hourglass here on the start, and we'll hand every player 2 flames, those are these things, and then every player also gets 2 resources, 2 wheat, 2 axes, 2 hammers, and 2 coins that they put behind their privacy screen. We'll shuffle the disaster cards, place them next to the board. We'll shuffle also the military cards, put them also next to the board. Every player then also gets these location cards, 11 of them. One player shuffles them, puts them on in front of them, and then every other player will have to copy the order in which those cards are here. During the game, this order will change, but everybody will start with the same order. And lastly, we'll hand out the starting marker to one of the players. That's it. We're good to go.